Hi thinkers, welcome to another tutorial in the JavaScript playlist. In this video, we're going to start with functions, and basically functions are very important in every programming language that you will see. It can be C++, C, Java, Python. You take it and their functions are very important. So why functions are important, we're going to discuss it, and we will also play around with some HTML also, which you can see will create this type of thing. And what it will do is we will type some input in it, in the first input, and in the second input we will uh, give an input, let's say 5. Then we will create a button add, and when I will press it, it will actually call the JavaScript function and it will add these two numbers, and it will display it in this input. So let me click this. So you can see now 8 is being displayed here, right? So this is basically how you can actually use functions. So first of all, a simple detail, a basic idea of what exactly a function is. So at its core, a function is basically it has various use cases, but what essentially it does is if you will provide some input to the functions, it is most likely to do some operations on that input and it will give you some output, right? So in some cases we do not even provide input, but we can call the function and it will do some operation for us. So let me just remove this, and let's first understand the basics of functions, and then we will come to this program in this tutorial. So let's suppose we have a line in JavaScript. I will use a line alert, and here I will write a message, let's say error, whenever there is an error inside of any JavaScript operation that we are trying to perform, right? So you can see that when I will save it, it will show an alert box with an error message, which you can see here. Now whenever we want to display that there is some error in some operation, let's say we are actually trying to send some request to the server, and in that case if there is some error going on, we can display it using alert, or we can also use some other things like document.write, which we will discuss later on, to display the error inside of the HTML. So basically, if I will try to if I want to call this particular line a lot of times, whenever there is a function, I do not need to write this line again and again. What simply I can do is I can create a function using the function keyword, and I will name this function, let's say I will name it as error underscore message, right? And then it will be preceded with the circular brackets, and then we will write the block of statements for this function, and inside of this I'm going to write alert error message, right? Or simply error. So what happened is, you can see I've created a function error message which will display the alert box error, and this is basically a name error message. Whenever I want to display an error on the screen, I will just make a call to this function, right? So this thing which we have seen in these 3 lines, this is actually the you can say the implementation of the function. So I'm going to write just the implementation. Remember that if you have defined a function, JavaScript will not automatically call it. You will have to call this function explicitly. And let's see how we can do that. Let's see how to call a function. Simple way to call a function. It's very simple to call a function. Just use the name, which is the error message, the circular brackets, and a semicolon. So when I will write this line, the JavaScript will automatically call this function, and basically the control of the compiler will go to the function, and it will go inside the block of statements of this function. So if I will hit save, now you can see it has called the error message, and now it is showing me error message. So it is important to call a function in order to make it function well and do the work inside of these block of statements, right? So this is a very simple use case of a function. Now let's say I want to make a function, a simple function which will add two numbers. So I'm going to write add two numbers, or let's say just add two. And now what I want to do is I want to add two numbers, and I will supply the two numbers at the time of function call. So basically I'm going to do something like this. Let's say I want to find out the addition of 3 comma 4, right? So I will call this function add2 3 comma 4, and since it is actually trying to pass these two arguments, we'll have to capture these two arguments, which is 3 and 4, inside of the function implementation. And the simplest way to do is just define two variables, let's say a comma b. And now here these are the two variables a and b. On the top I'm going to define these as variables a comma b, and even if I don't do this, it will still work, right? So now inside of this function, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just do the, I will just show the output, which is a plus b. And if I will save this, now you can see I'm calling the function 3 comma 4, and it should display the value a plus b, right? So save this, and this is our HTML. All right, so a comma b, I will have to define them. Let's define it here, that a and b are two variables. All right, so you can see that this is not actually calling this function add2. So we can see if this function is being called or not by using console.log function, and I will just write here function called, right? So that you can know that actually it is showing or not. So now you can see when I will save this, it is actually showing me 7, which is 3 plus 4. Even if I remove this line, this is for the console purpose. So if you want to test whether your uh, function is being called or not, whether you are making anything wrong, you can go to the console and you can see it is actually saying function called, right? That's an important trick. All right, so now we are giving some inputs to our function, and the function is capturing these two inputs, and we are just displaying them inside of in these two variables, which is a plus b. We are just displaying it in an alert box. Now let's test one important thing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create, let's say instead of variable, all right, let's create a variable c equals to 5 and d equals to 6, right? So I've created these two variables, 5 and 6, which is c and d. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to call the add2 function, and instead of passing just 5 and 6, I will pass c comma d, right? And here I'm going to use document.write function to display the value of c and d, right? Or let's say sum of c and d, right? Sum of c and the variable d before calling the function, before add2, right? So let's see what is the values of c and d, what is the sum of uh, the variable c plus d. If I will add them, let's see what will be the output. Now here I will write c plus d, right? So if I will save this, let's remove this alert from here, and now you can see I'm passing these two. You can see c plus d is actually actually it is concatenating. So basically I will have to, all right, just let it be like this. So the values of c and d is 5 and 6 before calling the function add2, right? Now we're going to call the function AddTo with the values 5 and 6, which is C and D. And here in the function call, instead of writing A comma B, I'm going to write C comma D. So now it will be C comma D. And now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to display the value of C and D here in the function AddTo. So let's change the value of C and D here. I'm going to change the value of C as, let's say, 8, and I'm going to change the value of D equals to, let's say, 9. So now if I will save this, you can see that it is showing that before calling the AddTo function, the value of C is 5 and D is 6, and inside of the function we have changed the value of C as 8 and 9. Now you can see I have made this assignment of C and D. I've changed the values of C and D. Let's see what will happen when we try to get the value of C and D after the call of the function, right? So let's see what is the value sum of C and D after calling the value, after calling this function AddTo, right? I'm quickly going to make a break here, which will display all these results in the next line like this. All right, so now you can see here, when we were not calling the AddTo function, the value of C is 5. Then after, inside of the AddTo function, the value of C has been changed to 8, which you can see. But you can see after calling this function AddTo, the value of C remains unchanged. It's again 5, and same is happening with D also. It's the same. It's 6 here. So this is an important point to note here, that if you will pass primitive types to the function is not going to override the values. This is really a very important point. For example, if instead of these integers, if I will pass strings, it will not override these values even if I try to do a reassignment, which you can see from this example. But in case we are trying to pass arrays or object to a function, it will overwrite the values inside of the arrays. So basically we can say that when we are trying to call a function and we are passing some primitive types to the function, it will create a copy of those variables, and then it will do all the assignment operations and all the things inside of this function only. It is not going to change the value of C and D, right? So let's say I create here, I'm going to remove D to make this program much simple. I'm going to just remove D. Let's work with single variable. All right, so now let's take a look at the arrays here. So I'm going to create an array here, which is the C array, which will have 5, 6, 7 inside of this, and here it will display before AddTo. Then here also I will write in AddTo, and now this will be after AddTo, right? So now I'm going to pass only the array, which is C, which is 5, 6, 7. You can see that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the value at the first position. I'm going to make a reassignment here. Let's change it to 10, right? So you can see C1 is actually 6. So before AddTo, let me just save this. Now you can see that before calling the AddTo function, the value of the array is 5, 6, 7, which is C here. You can see that. Now this is before calling this AddTo function. Now after calling this AddTo function, you can see that the value at the first position has changed to 10, which is because of this assignment. Now since we are passing an array to this function, after the call of this function AddTo, you can observe that the change inside of the array remains intact, right? So that's the difference between passing primitive types and arrays. And when we will study about objects in the further tutorials, we can even pass objects to the functions, right? So a very simple and a definitive guide of how functions work. Now functions are very important because we can actually perform a lot of operations inside of the HTML, which we are going to do right now, right? So let me remove all this code, and here inside of HTML, the first task I'm going to do is I'm going to create an input input tag, and I will give it an ID equals to, let's say it is a first number, right? And I will also give it a placeholder which will be first number, right? If I will save this, uh, let me just save this also. So now if you will save this, you can clearly see that it is showing first in the placeholder, right? Now I will create one more input which we will capture using JavaScript. This is the second, which has the ID second, and the placeholder I will write second, and this input is going to come in the next line. So I'm going to use the break, which is BR preceded with this slash symbol. If I will save this, you can see there are actually two inputs now. So I will give the first number here, I will give the second number here, and now I will have to create an add button, right? So let's quickly create a button, and let's name this button as the, I will give an ID to this button as add, right? Or we do not need to give the ID. What we will do is we will use the onclick function, which is an which is a predefined, it's not a function, it's basically when you will click on this button, it will do something, and basically we are going to make call to the add function, which is in our JavaScript. And now here I'm going to write add, right? If I will save this, you can see an add button here. Let's move this also in the next line, right? So now you can see we have two inputs and a button. So if I will click this button, it will call the add functions, which has to be there inside of the um, JavaScript. So I'm going to create an add function. So let's test this function by using alert, and inside of alert I'm going to write just hello, right? So now what I'm going to do is, if I will click this button, it will call the function add, and this will actually create this hello box, right? So it is really good that this function is being called. This way you can check whether the function is called or not. But we want to do some we want to have some functionality here, which is to add the numbers in these two input placeholders. You can see that, and we will display it in the input field, which will have ID equals to answer, and the placeholder will be answer, right? So I will save this. So now we can see we have first element, second, and when we will click add button, we want to show answer here, right? So now we have to do something inside of the add function. All right, so let's see how we can capture the values of these variables or these input fields, which has the ID and uh, first and second, right? So let's capture the first input in the JavaScript. So the way to do is, first we will create a variable a, which will hold the value which the user will input inside of this first input. And the way to do is to use a document dot get element by id function, which is a predefined inbuilt function. And you can see it, basically it is a string that specifies the id value. So let's specify a string which is the ID first inside of HTML. which you can see that the id is first here. So we are going to write document.getElementById first. Remember that the id has to be unique. You cannot use it again, because in that case it will be ambiguous, right? So now to capture the value, we will have to use dot value, right? And in this way we can actually get the value which will be passed here, right? If I will pass 4 here, this will capture the value 4 and it will store it in the variable. Now an important point to note here is that this 4 which will be captured by this line is actually going to be a string, right? So we will have to convert it into a number. The way to do is to use the number function, and we will put this everything inside of this, and we will save this, right? Let me remove this. Now similarly what we are going to do is we are going to just copy and paste this, and we will create another variable which is b, and I'm going to, instead of first id, I'm going to use the id second, and we will capture the second value also, right? So instead of here, I think it should be here, and this should also go here. Alright, so now we have captured a and b from these two inputs. Let's add them. So we will create a variable c, and we will actually add a plus b. And now what I'm going to do here is, we want to, this is the answer, right? So instead of c, I will write that this is the final answer. So we want to display the answer inside of this input, right? So the way to do is very simple. Just use document.getElementById, and we are going to specify the id of this input, which I guess is the answer. Yes. So I'm going to write answer here. Then I'm going to use again dot value, and I'm going to assign it to the answer variable, right? So what essentially we are trying to do is, we captured the values of these two inputs in the variables a and b, then we add them up and we have stored it inside of the answer. And then finally what we are doing is, we are changing the value of this input, which is the answer, and we're assigning it to the answer variable, which we have calculated before, right? So it will display it in here. So let's run this program. Now an important thing is, you can find this whole code inside of the Android application. I will post it there. You can find that it's available for free, and basically you can try it, this program yourself, to get familiar with how functions are working and play around with them, right? So let's write 4 and press add. So now you can see 4 plus 2 is 6, which it is displaying because of this line, right? So that's all for this tutorial. Thanks for watching.